speaker, Andrew Lockman, is in fact here. And we are very fortunate to have such a distinguished member of the DNC to speak with us. Thank you to Jonathan Adler for making the arrangements. And now Jonathan Adler will introduce Andrew Lockman. Thank you, Jonathan.
I'm going to introduce now Andrew Lockman. And basically our topic is, can we hold the Senate and democracy? And so these are the most critical races and how we can help in those races. Andrew Lockman is a Los Angeles attorney, and this is also the day that all the Democratic National Committee people come to Laguna Woods, but apart from the Swallows, that's just another trivial. And he is an elected DNC member, Democratic National Committee. He is the chair of its Small Business Owners Council. He is chair of the CDP, the California Democratic Party's Business and Professions Caucus. Andrew is highly active at all levels of the Democratic Party in politics and campaigns, and in all three branches of government, from the city to the federal levels. His service to those in the last 3 decades, if I recounted them to you here, we'd be here all night, so just take my word for it. He's amazing. He often speaks, publishes, he posts. He's a keen political analyst. So he's ideal to speak to us about the future control of the Senate, how we can most effectively help in these closely contested races across the nation. So please, Democrats, fellow Democrats, welcome Andrew Lockman to Laguna Woods. Thank you.
No, in all seriousness, thank you, and my apologies for running a little behind. I serve on a commission for Culver City where I live, where we determine funding for student populations for our school district, particularly those who are English learners, unhoused, foster students, foster families, and we had a meeting tonight. I try not to miss those meetings because I understand the importance in making sure that those voices and those students get the help they need to thrive with the difficult circumstances that they deal with. So my apologies for that. I'm also speaking to you tonight not only as a member of the Democratic National Committee, but I am the most recently been elected the Western States Caucus Chair. And this is important because so much of this of the battle for the Senate, for the House, for the White House is coming through the Western states. And we are all fully mobilized to try to make sure that we are protecting our democracy, holding on to the White House, expanding the Senate, and winning back the House. Those are our goals and what needs to be our goals. Because what you saw tonight, Jon Stewart, is the alternative of what we would have to deal with. And I don't think any of us would have thought in our lifetimes that we would see a willingness and this kind of challenge, and for people who are willing to disregard our democracy in order to make sure that only one voice is heard. That's not what this is about. So what I will say, and we can talk a little bit through the states here, as far as the House goes, we're now down only by 3 votes. So 3 more seats flipped one way or another, we pick up the House of Representatives and take it back from the musical chairs clown show that is the Republican Party under Speaker Johnson / McCarthy / the 3 or 4 people who they couldn't decide on in between. And for those of us who are active, to see the former representative formerly known as Mr. Santos or whatever his name is, and whatever his many achievements were, and we saw Tom Suozzi wipe out this guy. And what we've also seen in these special elections over and over again is that Democrats have outperformed every single time. And that could provide us with a good deal of hope. Doesn't mean that this is one. Doesn't mean we don't have to we don't have to work really hard, but at least it shows that people are hearing what is going on. And if you look at, for a moment, and this is related to the House, but if you look at who the Republicans have nominated for their gubernatorial candidate in North Carolina, who apparently thinks that it's all a talk show and he can just espouse opinions about women, about a number of other minorities, casting aspersions on Jews as well. This is where the Republican Party is, but it's not where the majority of Americans are. And even in states like North Carolina, we have a shot as a result. So let's talk very quickly about the House, and then we can go talk about the Senate as well. So the House, to win back the House, we have to go through the West. The number one state we have to win is California. Where you are, Orange County, Central Valley of California, that is the battle, and also Northern LA County. There are 5 seats that we need to win in order to do this. One is making sure that we hold on to Katie Porter's seat with Dave Min. The one thing that I find very encouraging from having worked, and by the way, I have about 20, 30 years of campaign experience myself. I was Ted Lieu's political director when he was elected to Congress. I was an organizer in West LA when, for the coordinated campaign in 2002. I worked for Steve Wesley, as well as having been the deputy constituency director for Cary Edwards, Pennsylvania. So that district has a very large Asian American population in it, and Dave Min is in some ways has, now that this is over, and look, Joanna was amazing and would have been a great member of the House as well, but Asian American voters as a whole still tend, by and large, to vote identity-wise. So when I worked for Ted Lieu, who was Taiwanese American, we saw parts of Palos Verdes that normally vote overwhelmingly Republican. Like, they have nothing against Democrats, every block should have one, okay? They were voting in much closer margins, and Ted Lieu was winning some of these precincts because Asian American voters saw an Asian American name on the ballot. And that matters to these sorts of, to Asian American voters, the same way that many of you may remember many years ago, back when Kennedy was running for president and you were in areas where there were Irish American candidates, if they had that name, didn't matter what party they were going to win. There's a maturity level that goes with any group when they become part of, become American citizens and then participate and increase their involvement in the process. So Dave Min has a very good shot against former Assemblyman Ba. You have also Mr. Kerr running against Young Kim. That is a district that is very divided. It does have a sizable Asian American population, but it also has a very sizable Latino population, which tends not to vote Democratic. You have Mike Levin, who is in a tough race to hold on to his seat. So that's a hold that we need to do. And I'm trying to go through all of my districts here and remember every single one of them here. So you have, and you have Michelle Steele as well, which we have held on to before. It's a more Republican seat than usual, but we have a great candidate. It looks like it's going to be Mr. Tran. Same issue with that district, large Asian American population. Last time, before the lines were drawn, there was a very good Chinese American candidate, and they tried to paint him and capitalize on fear in the Vietnamese American community that somehow he was connected with China. When you have a Vietnamese candidate running, that's less likely to happen. And so we have a decent shot there. Up north, we have, I believe it's Adam Gray running against, trying to remember the name of the candidate. No, that's Whitesides versus Garcia. For those of you who don't know, that's a D+7 district. We should be winning this, but we've had a problem because Democrats in ex-urban areas are different than Democrats in suburban areas. And so what you saw, for instance, during the last election cycle, when you saw Republicans picking up these school board seats, it's even more heightened in these ex-urban areas. And by the way, congratulations on recalling at least one, if not two, members of the Orange Unified School District. It was both, yes. So again, that's a sign people are fed up with the extremism. So what you've got in this district where Garcia is running against Whitesides is you have a person with a Latino surname who votes more like, who votes as a very conservative Republican. And he has just been cited for insider trading stocks because he's on the Armed Services Committee. But members of the House and the Senate are not subject to insider trading laws. So while it's not illegal, it's unethical. However, we need to really turn out and make sure that Whitesides, who's a formerly used to work with NASA under the Obama administration, yes, we do have a rocket scientist running. Yes, so we've got Will Rollins against Ken Calvert. That's another one. You've got Adam Gray. And then you've got Valadao running against Rudy Salas as well. Those are the races we have to win in California. If we can win three of them, that's great. If we win all five, it's game over. In Oregon, you have there used to be there's a district that includes parts of Eugene, and it was a moderate Democrat who was defeated in the primary by a very progressive Democrat, and the Republican picked up the seat. This is another example of an ex-urban district because it's, despite having parts of University of Oregon, most of the district is rural to ex-urban towns. And so there are challenges, much like we've had in the Central Valley, in terms of getting people to turn out and vote, and Democrats to stay with Democrats, because after the pandemic, where they've been isolated for so long, it has created sort of a different mentality, and people are starting to realize the price of that. And so we have a shot at that seat. There's also a seat in Washington, Maria Gluskamp, if she can hold on to that seat, where she defeated a pretty right-wing Republican, that will also help us. That's a defense seat. In Colorado, Lauren Boebert couldn't win her own district, so now she's moved into Ken Buck's district, because Ken Buck has had enough. To me, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. When I worked for Ted Lieu, he was the office across the hall from us. This is the guy who was attacked for bringing an assault rifle into his office. And now he's the voice of moderation in the Republican Party. So you've got that seat, and then you've got Lauren Boebert's old seat, where you've got Ken Frisch, who is a Colorado Springs city councilman who has a really good shot of winning that seat. So you've got Colorado as well. In Montana, you have a seat where Ryan Zinke is being challenged. I'm going to a fundraiser next week for his opponent, who's a former Olympian, and she looks like she's going to be a great candidate. In Nevada, we hold 3 seats in the House. We have to hold those 3 seats. Again, 3 of the 4 seats in order to hold on to the House. But we've got great candidates there who should be able to do that. In Arizona, you had 2 Republicans who Biden won their district. Cusimano, I think was his name. Siscomani was his name. Siscomani, and then Dave Schweikert, who again is a very right wing. And both of them are being challenged by Democrats and have a very good chance of winning those. So if we can win all of those, and they just did redistricting in New York, there wasn't a lot of change, but a couple of districts became a little bit more Democratic. So if we can pick those up, it's going to make up for the fact that the Republicans and their gerrymandering wisdom in North Carolina and in Georgia and in Alabama, where they were told you have to create more seats for under the Voting Rights Act, so they took the white Democratic seats and made them more Republican. So we may lose some of those, but we can make them up in these other places. And if we do that and hold on to the seats that we have in the Midwest and the ones in Michigan, which looks very good as well, we win the House back. And there is a very likely path to do that if we all do the work to make that happen. Senate is a lot more difficult. It's a harder map, right? Now, we have an amazing candidate here in Adam Schiff, who is phenomenal, and he's running against an opponent who, there's a reason why he usually played, he sometimes played third base from what I remember, and sometimes first base. That's because he's not going to get to home on this particular race. So I'm ashamed of myself. I've been a Dodgers fan for a long time. I should know better. But in some of these other, but Jackie Rosen is having a tough race in Nevada, and we need to make sure that we're helping her. She has an okay shot if we all make it work, but Nevada, again, operates like one big, massive exurban and suburban state. I worked for her for when she got elected to Congress, and this was a seat that, again, was South Las Vegas, went all the way down to Lake Mead, Henderson. Suburban and exurban, that is, but then if you get into North Vegas, it's the same thing as well. So it's really important that, that we need to find, her messaging needs to reflect that. But she's very sharp, one of the best members of the Senate I've ever gotten to know. And I think if we show her the support and volunteer, make phone calls, she has a very good shot at that. Arizona, Kristen Sinema is not running. I don't think any of us are surprised. But that means now it becomes a closer race with Ruben Gallego running against a number of candidates, but Carrie Lake is the most likely. You want to talk about, she and Robinson, what just comes out of their mouth is just stunning. But what happens is, again, a lot of Arizona operates, particularly the areas around Phoenix, which is the most important part of the state. Some of them operate, again, like exurban. You have a lot more retirees, you have older populations who tend to vote more conservative, but you also have a very energized young Latino population that is excited about Ruben Gallego, who is a veteran. He served in Iraq, and is a very dynamic candidate who I think will do well. But the polls are showing that he is either tied or ahead by a point or two. The most recent ones I've seen have shown that it's within 5, but it changes a lot. And so while he's ahead, we should not take that for granted just because Republicans tend to outperform their polling. Look, Biden was ahead by way more than that, and we barely squeaked that one out. So we don't take that for granted. Now, that brings us to Montana. I'm going through the western states because the western states are the most important. Montana, you've got John Tester. Tester is a well-known personality in Montana. But while Montana has increased in population, it's a red to purple state, and he's been a moderate Democrat. But they're trying to paint him as much as possible as being tied to the liberal establishment, and he has to fight that. And there is a Trump-endorsed candidate who's running against him, who is a blank slate. And you'll hear this a lot with the Republicans, is that they want to support people based on their bio, not who they are. So therefore, they have no political positions they've taken in the past. They can say all kinds of stuff, and it sounds just hunky-dory to their particularly the Republican base, and then some. And so Tester is one that's going to be one of our ones most difficult to defend, where there's an incumbent. And we're going to need to put extra effort into making sure that John Tester stays there. So having now gone through all the western states, and you can see now how important the western states are, we've never been ground zero before. Now everyone cares about California, cares about Arizona, cares about Montana, Colorado. So, this is a great opportunity because you can take a trip out to these places. It's easy for you to volunteer, and it's easy for you to also phone bank, and people generally won't be offended. You won't have time zone differences, where you're calling people at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock your time, and people are going to bed on the East Coast. So, in the Midwest, you have Sherrod Brown tonight. Moreno looks like he won, which was Trump's endorsed candidate. So, there's going to be I'm sure there's good opposition, but Ohio it's viewed as a red state, but because of the genuineness of who Sherrod Brown is and his strong labor ties. And I don't know if you've ever seen him, he does not look like your usual politician. He also looks like someone who hasn't seen a comb in a while. But that kind of genuineness is what's important in Ohio. And if you look at what happened with the special election, which they tried to take away the right to choose, or actually in that particular case, they were trying to change what it took to get on the ballot, to put an initiative, and then they tried to take away the right to choose. The voters did not go along. Their rights are at stake, and that gives us some hope in Ohio that somebody like Sherrod Brown, who still has a lot of miles left on him as a politician, has a pretty good shot. But it's going to take a lot of work because it's Ohio. So Wisconsin and Michigan. Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, she's in a very good spot. She's been ahead, very popular politician. It just shows how far Wisconsin has come, where, I'm trying to remember the name of the former governor who was What was the name? Yes, exactly. See, the trauma, I blocked it out because I grew up in Wisconsin and Milwaukee and Baltimore. So, but yeah, the Walker machine is not what it is, pretty much fallen apart. And so the Wisconsin Democratic Party has figured out that voters are tired of the extremism. There was a recent decision that forced the state house and the Senate to finally redraw their lines to reflect the partisanship of the state, because it's a state where Republicans were not in the majority, but they had a near supermajority in both the House and in the state House and the state Senate. That has changed. And so people will be motivated in Wisconsin. And interestingly, although on the national level, as you saw, Biden versus Trump has been a little bit more difficult. Ultimately, I think Biden's strong relationships with labor will make a big difference in that, and small business will make a difference there as well. Michigan, Debbie Stabenow is retiring. You have Alyssa Slotkin, who seems to be the leading candidate. I know her. She's fantastic, a great bridge builder. You've got two other lesser-known candidates, one who is a decent actor, and then a city council member, I want to say from Lansing, who is representing the large Muslim communities that are in and around the Wayne County area. However, those communities haven't organized and don't churn out as fully, and Slotkin is better known across the state. Every single time, and I'm not trying to disrespect progressive voices, but they don't make up more than a third of the party at any one time. So if you want to win, you have to be able to move beyond where we are on a national level, and Michigan is that way as well. So I think you're likely to see Slotkin there. The Republicans are having a much more contentious primary. You've got Peter Meyer, who was a House rep for one term, and is a supermarket magnate as well. For anyone who was in the Midwest and remember Myers, that's his family. And a couple of other candidates. It's anybody's guess where that one's going to go. But in any case, Slotkin, each of the Republicans are pretty far out. And so you're looking at a pretty good shot to hold on to Michigan for the Senate, especially if Slotkin. The one thing we just need to worry about there more than anywhere else is making sure that these votes in Wayne County stay motivated. There's a lot of pressure right now in that particular state to be uncompromising in a way reflecting the demographics that I just mentioned with respect to the populations around there. But there is a focused effort to make sure for both Slotkin, who is Jewish, and also for Biden, that Michiganders understand what is at stake here. And we believe that will come through. So that moves us to the East Coast. You've got Joe Manchin. That is going to most likely be a Republican turnover. It's just the way where West Virginia has been trending for a long time. They're following what has happened with the southern states. The population has gotten older. There's less economic opportunity. People have been leaving the state, and communities, it just has gotten more conservative. Also because of the much lower education level. If you look at older voters who don't have a college education, those are the people who you saw up on the screen earlier, and that's also West Virginia, quite honestly. So I think West Virginia is going to be a loss. Now remember, we've only have a 2-seat, one seat majority here. So that means that puts us at a tie, and we have to try to pick up something. We have we have a couple of places where we might be able to pick that up. One of which is Texas, believe it or not. Ted Cruz, who decided during the cold freeze that he was going to Acapulco when most of Texas was without electricity, is very unpopular. And the polls are showing Colin Allred being tied. Now, if there's one thing, I know I went off about how biographies, you shouldn't elect people on their biographies. But if there is one biography that stands out in Texas, it's Football Heroes. And Colin Allred, having played in the NFL and having served several terms as a congressman for parts of Dallas, is a very engaging candidate. Now, there is another candidate running. He is a state senator from the, I want to say, the San Antonio area, but he's running as a progressive in Texas. Beto tried, and Beto O'Rourke is a dynamic individual who unfortunately doesn't like to pay attention to polls and doesn't have the discipline of being a candidate, and I think ultimately that's what did him in. Colin Allred is a liberal to a moderate candidate. He represents Dallas, which is important to win, even though still a majority of Texans live in rural areas. But he's the kind of candidate who can appeal across lines and who has a genuine shot to beat, not Acapulco, but Cancun Ted Cruz. So, and then we've got Florida. The one thing, Rick Scott, having headed up a healthcare company, has a lot of money. But he hasn't figured out running in Florida, calling for the phasing out and the changing of Social Security does not go over well. And that has been one of the centerpieces of his messaging as a member of the U.S. Senate. So you have a former Representative Debbie I can never pronounce, I think it's Mocarsel Powell, who's a former member of Congress. The redistricting affected her and a number of other issues. And so she has an okay shot. But Florida is always a tough sell just because the DeSantis has a certain Republican machine that has worked very well. And it's going to be a very tough one to win, just like North Carolina is always a tough one to win. Although, again, this time I think, there's a chance of it just because of what's on the line and because of the complete idiot that they have running for governor. And I'm being diplomatic, and I don't mean to be mean to the idiots. But that's where we are. So then that brings us to the presidential race. And a lot of the states that we've talked about are still the ones that are in play. Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, making sure that we hold on to Michigan, Wisconsin, and also winning Pennsylvania and Georgia, which we didn't talk about. From talking with the administration and the folks on the campaign, they know the democracy is on the line. They know how hard they've had to work. The one benefit is that we've raised almost 3 times as much money as the Republicans have. The Republican National Committee has mostly been a piggy bank for Donald Trump's legal bills. And so they are not pulling in money. And with what they've done in terms of firing most of the staff, including those who are active on fundraising, is that they're putting themselves in a more difficult spot of how do they raise the money other than a couple of billionaires. And a couple of those billionaires are a little busy trying to fund RFK to try to serve as a spoiler. Now, I will tell you, as somebody, I worked for Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, who was Bobby Kennedy oldest daughter. Amazingly smart. No one from his family is supporting him because they realize what's at stake and that this is a vanity project for RFK. And sometimes when you're in the world of, as we saw also with Ralph Nader, when you're in the world of uncovering conspiracies, because some of them were true, it doesn't mean all of them are true. And sometimes sometimes people tend to get so lost into that world that they believe too many conspiracies. And we've seen that. Now, don't get me wrong. Look, I was a Green Bay Packers fan, but at least Aaron Rodgers is not going to be his VP. But they're talking about a woman named Shanahan is the name I've heard from the news, who is basically another entrepreneur of some sort. But there is a very real risk that that RFK can take away some Democratic votes or enough to make a difference. What has happened so far is the polling has shown that actually he pulls slightly more Republican votes than Democratic votes. So it pulls some from Trump too, but they're calculating and hoping it will pull more Democrats. Then you've got folks like Cornel West, who has managed to tick off the Green Party and the Peace and Freedom Party all in a matter of months. But there's still going to be some effort to try to get him onto the ballot in a couple of these states to try to pull votes off the left. And then, of course, you have Stein, who, like, we didn't learn the lesson the first time with her. But they're about movement building. They're not about governing. They feel if the nation falls into Trump dictatorship that people will look to them, which is exactly what the Republicans are hoping too. Is that if everything gets outrageous enough, people will give up their freedoms. We can't govern as a democracy that way. But we need to be out there messaging and making sure people understand what this president has done. You have one of the most pro-labor presidents we have ever had. He's the one who pushed the automobile companies to get to the table to make sure that automobile workers got fair pay for what they were doing. He is the one who, through the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan, has saved small businesses. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, I can't believe I'm on the screen, Donald Trump tried to cut programs for small businesses. There are microloan programs that help small businesses, especially those that don't have access to capital, have access. They wanted to eliminate one of them and cut the other one by almost half. They also, we have one of the most pro-education presidents that we've ever had. Student loan forgiveness. I was there in Culver City when he announced that 135,000 new borrowers, I believe it is 1.3 billion in student loans was being forgiven. And this is dealing with a Congress and a Supreme Court that doesn't want it. And that brings me to the most important thing that's on the line, the Supreme Court. If the Trump administration wins, that allows him to replace Clarence Thomas so he can, and so he can go off to his retirement, whoever paid for his house, but he can replace somebody just like him. We saw what happened in 2016 when voters said, yeah, but the emails, and we kept on telling them, it's about the Supreme Court, and we were right. If we want to stand up for democracy, if we want to stand up for reproductive choice, if we want to stand up for small business and working people, we need to reelect President Biden. And your work is going to be so important in talking to voters and understanding what we've gotten and where we are. And I will take that experience any day over a slightly younger, but also equally elderly dictator any day of the week. And I hope you all will too. So this is what we have at stake. This is what we need to do. And I want to encourage all of you, and this brings us to the last step, the last part. What can you do to make a difference, to make sure this will happen? I don't know if Orange County has the same phone banks that we have in Los Angeles. We have groups like the Grassroots Headquarters, Indivisible up north. There are a couple of organizations as well. Every year they do hundreds of thousands of calls into these districts. Not only talking to your friends here in Orange County and making sure that we pick up these seats, but then making calls into these other places. You have an opportunity to share your experience and your passion for democracy and for one of the most effective presidents we've ever had. And sharing that with other people and getting the message out about what's at stake. And that was what will make a difference. That's what will make a difference for us taking back the White House. That's what will make a difference for expanding the Senate. That's what will make a difference for us taking back the House. But it has to be in your hands, in your time, in your spare time, to be able to help make those phone calls. Not all of us have the ability to raise money. And obviously, if people can give on a recurring basis, that helps too. That's something we all need to do. But your time is what is also going to make a big difference in all of this. And I hope all of you will volunteer, and your Democratic club will volunteer for Democratic candidates here in this county, will volunteer for races that are going on across this country to make sure that we can reach these goals and protect our democracy. Thank you.
It is, your reaction is the following. It is said that if Aaron Rodgers is picked by RFK Jr., if he runs with RFK Jr., and at the very first rally, he's likely to pull his Achilles and be sidelined. Is there any comment on that?
Well, he's looked up he's become an expert on healing himself and immunization. So I'm sure he can heal himself somehow, just like that's right, he didn't make the entire season this year, and he said he was going to do that too. Okay, maybe not. No, look, in all seriousness, the consensus is Rodgers is not going to be the vice president. Besides, he still has a couple of years left on his contract with the Jets as well. And as a Packers fan, I wish him good riddance.
So just to go back a couple of minutes, this question, do postcards work? We do a lot of postcarding. And if so, which races should we be supporting as a priority for postcarding?
So yes, postcards can help, particularly because people answer phones less and less. And so every angle you can find is a good one. So I would say the places that will make the difference, I would say looking at the house races that you have here in your own community, getting a postcard from someone who lives nearby is better than getting a postcard halfway across the country. If I may share my own feeling, when I was in DNC, we had an election for DNC chair. Remember, we had Tom Perez and Keith Ellison. I was getting calls from all over the country telling me I better support Keith Ellison or they were going to leave the Democratic Party. By the way, when I did vote, I, for better or for worse, I voted for Ellison because I asked my party here in California what they wanted, and they wanted an organizer, not a manager. I think Perez did a very good job as chair, for whatever it's worth. But getting a call from Ohio, particularly those people who like to call me at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning because they don't understand time zones, really doesn't endear me. So local politics counts. The difference that you can make in Orange County is the first place you should look. That being said, going to Nevada, Colorado, those would be good places. I would say Texas, they don't like Californians much. And so I would say the same with Oregon. They get angry that our biggest export to Oregon is Californians. So I don't know that that would necessarily be effective. But if if you're looking to sending them into places like Michigan and into Arizona, I think there are a lot of ex-Californians there. They remember it and they'll appreciate it.
Two closely related questions. It's really logistic. One person says that she would like to telephone into Texas and North Carolina, and the other one says, I phone banked from Miami to many other cities. So the question is, how do we access that opportunity here? In other words, logistically,
Sure.
people who want to call into particular places, what would you suggest for how they make contact with the phone bank?
I would say, first and foremost, groups like Grassroots Democrats, Indivisible, Swing Left, they run these phone banks. Be on their email list, see when they're planning on doing phone banking. You can also make requests to them and say, I would like to call into this state. And they'll, in many cases, will have scripts for you.
And here's a question from yours truly. Reports are, it relates to money, particularly Michigan and Arizona. They've been in internal conflict, the Republicans have.
Yes.
And are literally broke. What will the effect of that be, and is the same true elsewhere, and particularly with the RNC, if it gets to be Trump's lawyers' piggy bank?
Well, look, I think that gives us an advantage. But remember, there are a number of billionaires out there who are very happy to do their own IEs to stand in for Trump. The good news about it is, so if you're the Democratic Party, Republican Party, or a candidate, then you can, in fact, get a lower rate for advertising. If you are an IE, you have to pay, you don't get that discount. So it costs far more for them to reach voters on television than it costs the candidates.
What's IE?
Independent expenditures.
Uncoordinated.
Yes.
So-called uncoordinated.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you believe that, there's the Easter Bunny. All right, a couple of questions about the Biden administration. Number one, do you think he and other Democratic candidates will have a better shot at winning if they more overtly support a ceasefire in Gaza? And let me extend that by a month or two, looking out a month or two, in talking about Netanyahu as Schumer has. And a related question, the Biden administration has had a problem getting its message out. What are they going to do to address the problem? I want to just add something to that. A lot of articles talk about people taking positions out of faith, feelings, and belief, and cognitive dissonance, facts don't matter. It seems that we are members of a cult which is wedded to rationality, evidence, science, logic, and that kind of thing. Are we too deeply into that to deal with the people for whom that doesn't matter.
Well, first of all, it's my belief that one day stem cell research will cure republicanism. So that rationality in science does actually come into play. So I will say, with respect to the emotion issue, there's plenty of emotion on our side. There's defending our democracy. There's defending the right to reproductive healthcare choices for our families. There is plenty out there for us to motivate from an emotional as well as from the numbers. The numbers don't lie. I mean, look, we've got strong economic growth. Small businesses are doing better than ever. We have one of the most pro small business presidents we have ever had. And I will say that as somebody who I was on his policy team when they were coming up with some of these policies during the 2020 campaign, what you're seeing in terms of being able to provide support for these small businesses, the Republicans thought we could all just, or small businesses would just float on their own, because after all of us, have a parent we can turn to who can lend us a couple $1 million to start a real estate business. But that's not how it works. And I can speak from experience in that my wife is a first generation American, moved here from Guatemala when she was 4 years old. People in this country, particularly those in the, whether it's communities of color, especially, but those in the lower, who are economically disadvantaged, they don't have second chances. There was no one telling them, hey, this is how your business cycle works. You want to save money at this time so that you can prepare for this part of down season in your business. The Democratic Party is the one who stood there to make sure they had access to capital. Democratic Party is the one who made sure that they were there and had the support so that when businesses were having issues during the pandemic, that they had the economic support and the mentorship programs that not everyone has. And that's the difference that what makes a big difference between this president and Republican presidents who believe that the free market should control over people's lives in a way in which mass markets can fail. What happened in 2007, 2008 is a reminder to all of us of what happens in Republican policies that are totally market-oriented. Eventually, those markets get abused. We have to have a president who cares about people and who cares about, and Joe Biden is that person. So let me also talk a little bit about, were any of you in Sacramento for the Democratic Convention?
Yes.
Yes. I saw people hiding in the bathrooms because they were afraid for their lives. I saw people being hounded on the street, demanding that somehow if a delegate from Lodi is going to take a position on the ceasefire, that it's going to change what's going on in the Middle East. I understand why the passions are running high. It's so difficult when you see families who are caught in the middle between what Hamas has done, how they treat their own people, and what Israel and their tactics, which are at times ham-handed and quite honestly not effective. Look, 20% of the casualties in the first weeks of the offensive, the Israeli casualties, were friendly fire casualties. Israelis shooting their own people by accident, okay? So not to say that there aren't some real problems here, but the approach that everyone has taken of let's shout the other person out of the room, the other side, is stupid politics. And it may work in parts of the world where democracy doesn't flourish, that if you can just shout the other person out and you can dominate them. That is not what this country is about. And it's bad for the Democratic Party. We're not going to be able to win Nevada, which 10% of Nevada is Jewish, without their votes. We're not going to win Pennsylvania, where I believe it's around 3 to 4%, which means 8% of the vote in Pennsylvania is Jewish, if we try to shout them out of the room. But we're not going to win Michigan, and we're not going to win Virginia, which have high Muslim populations, by shouting them out of the room. And the approach of trying to make sure that everyone's voices are respected and that we acknowledge the tragedies that are going on, but also understand what Israelis have at stake too, has got to be the only way we get people out. And the expectations that are being set by advocacy groups on both sides of maintaining crises to grow their membership is hurting American democracy. and it's hurting all of us. And we as mentors need to help other people understand that, yes, we do need to stand up for innocent people, but it's not going to be done by shouting other people out of the room. And the expectation that that's what politics is hurting all of us, because then, each side is just trying to make the circle smaller and smaller and smaller, and you don't get to 50% by making your circle of friends smaller. I do think the administration is making good faith steps to acknowledge the need for a more calculated approach in that region, and it has done them some damage in some ways early. I know the Jewish community has been very appreciative, and look, 92% of U.S. Jews support the right of Israel to exist. Somewhere between 61 to 68% of U.S. Jews view Israel as a part of their identity, but also 61% of them don't like Netanyahu. We understand nuance, okay? But the key here is that there's a new population that has come in. There's demographic changes. I mentioned that with the Asian American community. There's a demographic change going on with the Middle East community as well. And that needs to be acknowledged and respected, and we need to understand how to speak to these communities better than we have. And that way, I think we may be able to address some of these issues, although we will not be able to address some of the more extreme elements, which unfortunately have been some of the most vocal and are doing the most damage.
Here is a very practical question.
Yes.
Regards the most effective way for us to donate money. The choices are to pick an individual candidate to give money to. Think of Amy McGrath in Kentucky, who raised about, $70 million to get beaten by double digits by Mitch McConnell. And Jamie Harrison, who wasn't far behind, raised huge amounts of money, not very effectively. Other choices are the DSCC, the DCCC, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and one that I have been ranting in favor of for years, which is the DLCC, the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, which raises money for state houses, state Senate, state other popular house, which in which a very little money goes a very long way. Yes. And they're the ones who do the gerrymandering.
Yes, no, absolutely. Look, the DSCC, the DCCC, they pay slightly more expensive rates than the candidates do, but they're still very good. I view investing in politics like investing in the real world. So you spread yourself out, you spread your risk out. If you need to go anywhere and say, just do this, I would say that the DCCC and the DSCC are good places to start, because they can focus a lot of effort into and do the appropriate risk assessment of who really has a shot and who doesn't. There are candidates in other parts of the state that, Jessica Morse, who's just a wonderful person, but she's not going to beat McClintock. It's just not going to happen. And so if you really need to focus your efforts, on the candidates that we said, and the DCCC, DSCC, DLCC. Those are really good ones. Also, secretaries of state. They determine elections. So.
And the official name of that organization is the Democratic
Association of
Secretaries of State?
Yes. I think it's the Association of Democratic Secretaries of State. That is a acronym that does not roll off the tongue easily. So.
Ask you to.
Yes. Do not make an ask of yourself, but give when asked.
Right.
Yes.
So one question, I'll add another. Is Ted Cruz really vulnerable? Let's expand that to Rick Scott. Cruz, I believe, won by only 1.9 percentage points against Beto last time around.
And it was I think it was more than that, but it was like 3-4% 6% something. Look, Ted,
Let
the-
me finish up.
sure.
Scott
Yeah.
has won his last 3 elections, including 2 for governor, by just about 1 percentage point each. So
Yes.
are they really vulnerable to a good campaign?
Especially in Texas more than ever. I mean, you know, Scott barely wins, but he finds a way of being likable to some people. Nobody likes Ted Cruz. And yeah, so, you know, that makes it a lot more difficult because at the end of the day, you know, a lot of folks, when they go into the ballot, they ask, who's the person who I'd like, not the person who I agree with, who's the person who I'd like to have a beer with? And Ted Cruz ain't that person. So, which, you know, also leads me to a very important point to make for many of you all before we go to the next question there. So there are people who are going to say, well, Biden hasn't done everything I've wanted him to. Now, Ed Koch used to tell people, make a list of 17 things you care about. If you agree with me on 12 of those 17, vote for me. If you agree with me on 17 of those 17, one of us should seek therapy. Okay? No one, this is not an all or none world. And you ask yourself, well, what kind of world, you know, do you want a Trump world or do you want a Biden world? Which one do you agree more with? And that's where you make your choice here. If you agree enough with Biden, you feel comfortable, that says something in itself. So, yes.
And here is a question. How much do you think new congressional maps will help Dems to retake the House? Think of, now, I have been following this pretty closely, but not all that closely recently. North Carolina gerrymandered initially 11 Republicans, 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and when the case was in the Supreme Court, Kagan's dissent quoted the guy who did the districting. They asked him, why did you district it 10-3 for the Republicans? And his answer was, I couldn't figure out a way to do it 11-2.
Yeah.
And that is true. He did say that. It was quoted. Has North Carolina been redistricted? They added a seat. They're 14 now. Did they get redistricted to 7-7? Did I see that?
I don't think it's 7-7. But look, there's the problem with North Carolina and with Georgia is when they were told you have to redistrict and you have to create more minority voice seats, they just took they took from Democratic seats and expanded out the Republican seats. So there's a chance we may be able to pick up 1 seat in North Carolina, but we may lose Kathy Manning and a couple of others as a result. So I'm not optimistic about North Carolina and Georgia as a result. There's a chance of it and we should fight, but it's going to be a lot tougher in terms of the House seats because of they've got this redistricting thing down to a cruel science.
Andrew, really, we can't thank you enough because that LA traffic down to here is terrible. So thank you for being here. Thanks to all of you for staying so long. And thanks for voting blue.